So, now that we've set up our recording template, it's time to focus on creating our room tone track. We're doing this because it means we can more aggressively run a noise gate without worrying about making our noise floor too low. Before we do anything, we need to make sure our gain is set correctly. So, your screen will currently look like this if you've been following through so far. We need to start by arming the recording track by clicking here. You're going to hear a double voice once you've armed the track, because record monitoring is on and you're probably monitoring through your device too, so you're hearing double of me. Click here until record monitoring is off and you'll no longer get the double/robot voice. So that's pretty essential to do. Make sure that you have some lines coming up and down here, which shows your device is the correct one selected. If not, remember, just go back into Reaper settings, select your audio device, make sure the right input's selected here. So, start by swapping track view. So right click on the track, go to track layout, then track panel, and go to 200% C. And then drag this bit to the right here. It's the track view with the widest meter. So it's particularly useful just when we're doing this bit right now. So make sure your microphone's set up, ready to use, and then hit record down here. You can use whatever script you want here. In my case, I am quite literally just using the script for the course. The important thing is to keep talking until you're confident you have the gain set right. So you'll need to adjust the gain up or down until the peaks are hovering around -12. And you can actually see the number at the top here to see what the highest peak you've hit so far is. So if I fiddle around until I actually find the right knob, I am going to adjust this. And we're getting a bit higher, Let's adjust a bit more. Still hitting around about 17. You can keep clicking, of course, at the top as well to reset where the peaks are. So I now have my peaks coming up. They're about -14. If I speak a bit louder, there we are, -12.12. That's a good level. I will leave it at that. So this level ensures your voice is nowhere near clipping, which will only happen if you hit 0, but it's going to leave plenty of headroom for post-processing. Obviously, adjust the volume on your monitor to your headphones or whatever you're listening with, so you don't deafen yourself if you're increasing the gain. So I'm going to stop that recording. I will actually refer back to it in a minute, as will you. So don't delete it. So just hit stop to stop recording. Now we're going to record some room tone. So ensure everything in your recording environment is as quiet as possible. Turn off fans, mute phones. Even consider turning off central heating if you have a noisy system. I turn off my central heating when I do this, and it's something you only have to do once really with each microphone. So it's really important for this bit that you don't breathe in the direction of the microphone, and you need to be as still as a statue. Honestly, if you don't think you can manage it, I would consider leaving the room while the recording happens and then just deleting the sections where you leave and re-enter to guarantee you don't interfere with the sound. However, your body contributes to the reflection of sound waves in your space. So if you can stay present, it will give a much more accurate room tone recording. So when you're ready, pause this video, hit record, wait 30 seconds, stop the recording, and then continue watching the video. Okay, you now have 30 seconds-ish of room tone, and I have 30 seconds of my laptop fan going like mad in the background, unfortunately. But the action we'll be taking is the same, regardless. Up here, at the top of the item, you've got the FX button. Click that. Type in voice. There we are, voice denoise. Drag it up to the item. Make sure adaptive mode is ticked. Make sure surgical is here. Optimize for dialogue. Leave threshold at 0. Reduction at 12. Once that's done, drag the recording down if you've ended up recording it in the recording track. I probably should have recorded it in the room tone track now that I think about it. And then right-click the item and click Glue Items. What that does is that actually applies the effects to the room tone recording we've done and creates a new item in its place with the FX applied. Next, we need to go to Spectrogram view by right-clicking the track, going to Spectral Edits and click Always Show Spectrogram. This is also a good time to visit the Peaks Display settings up here in the View menu. View, Peaks Display Settings. If you select Spectrogram, and you'll see that the way we have it set up is this dragged all the way to the right. If you see a spectrogram in normal circumstances, it will actually look more like this, which is not so helpful for when we're trying to identify stuff that's lower down in the frequency register. So I have that set up in the template that you imported. You can also, if you want, add decibels, effectively displaying more decibels to the waveform without actually affecting the waveform and increasing the volume of it itself. So I am going to, in fact, crank that up to there because that makes what is going on really, really visible. Just remember to turn that off later. And then turn ripple editing on. That's this button here. Click it twice so that it shows that ripple editing all tracks is enabled. And then go to the left of the item. Drag it a bit to the right to cut the beginning off. Drag to the right to cut the end off. And in fact, cut a bit more off because I do not want these brighter yellow bits appearing. There's far too much inconsistency there. And then we're going to inspect it and delete anything that stands out by putting a split to either side and deleting the bit in the middle. Because ripple editing is on, it will close up the gaps. So let's delete that bit. Let's delete that bit. This line here, because that's some sort of pop or click that is going to be very noticeable. This bright bit here. Let's get rid of the brighter bit here. And there you are. And oh, you got some more bits where there's some noise has made it further up into higher frequencies. Let's delete all those. Delete this bit as well. It's really important that you kind of get this bit right because this is the room tone track you will be using for everything when you're recording with whatever microphone you're currently using. Okay, zoom a bit more out again. Go back to View, Peaks Display Settings. Set your display zoom back to normal. You see it actually when you're not adding all that extra sound to the waveform visually. It actually looks much more similar the whole way through. Now select all the items. Let's select whatever the first item is. Hold Shift, click the last one. Then you're going to right click and click Glue Items. Again, that is getting rid of the items. They're not deleted, they're still on your hard drive, but it's removing them and replacing them with a single new audio file that effectively just contains everything, excluding what we've just cut out of it, which is great. That's exactly what we want. So next, drag your room tone all the way to the start. If you find yourself stuck on spectrogram view, go back to peaks display settings, go back to normal peaks, as that is why I've ended up stuck in that view. Now, once you've dragged your room tone track to the beginning, drag it to the right until it runs for about 1.5 minutes. Let's just stick it up to about here. You can see here that these are the points at which it loops. So there may well be some faint pops. Let's move this out of the way because I want to listen to it. So listen to your room tone, particularly at the point it joins. Unfortunately, you can hear my fan still. It wasn't a good room tone recording, and I will replace that before the next video. But as you can hear, there is also a very faint pop and click just when the join happens between the loops. It might honestly not even be audible over this recording. So I advise, even if you can't hear it, applying a D-click here. So if you have purchased RX11 standard during the last video, you're going to want to apply mouse D-click here. If you have RX elements, then you're going to want to apply regular D-click. So type it into the FX box down here, drag it up as an item FX. There we are. Set this to, it doesn't really matter that much because the clicks are very faint, but let's just change sensitivity to 5 and just leave it at that. If we give it a play, it will probably, there we are, it is removing some clicks, so that is exactly what we wanted. That's fine. It is also the opportunity to consolidate where our files are, because we've obviously replaced a lot of the recordings with later glued files, and we do not need those originals anymore. It's about the only time I do recommend cleaning the current project directory, so go to here. So I'm not going to delete this one. Let's not delete that one either, because I suspect that might actually be the one that is in use at the top. Make sure send files to trash is ticked, because you do not want this to go wrong. Click remove selected files, click OK, and just make sure you haven't just had anything disappear. That means your basic project default template folder, though, is no longer being clogged up by files that you're never ever going to need to use ever again. So one of the best things about using a non-destructive DAW is that we're about to extend this room tone a lot. And in something like Audacity, that would create a massive file, at least a massive duration file, even if the file size itself wasn't huge. In Reaper, all we are using is that same small file. It's just Reaper knows to repeat it again and again and again. So drag the room tone, zoom out a bit, drag it, oops, drag it, zoom out until you've got enough to actually drag, and then drag until you've hit about the 40-hour mark. I think less than maybe 1 in 10,000 audiobooks longer than 40 hours, if that. So you shouldn't ever need an even longer room tone. But if you do, literally just drag it further to the right. So next, we want to set things up so the room tone only plays when the audio is otherwise silent, or at least when it's quieter than the room tone track itself will be. So let's just get everything looking back the way I prefer it. So let's put the track layout back to 150% B, which is my preferred way of doing it. Drag this back to the left because I prefer it all looking nice and compact like that. And we can also drag the room tone up a bit so that it takes up less space. So, to set up the room tone to play only when necessary, we are going to use noise gates. And the built-in noise gate in Reaper, ReaGate, is more than capable of doing this. It's a fantastic gate. And since we are setting up the noise gate for the room tone track, we might as well take the time to set it up for our recording track too. So we're going to be using routing and sends for this next part. Start by opening the routing panel by clicking the root button here on the recording track. Then add a send from the recording track to the room tone track by clicking here, like this. Set the send to be pre-fader, pre-FX, which means the audio is sent before any effects or volume adjustments are applied. And make sure that the audio is routed from channels 1/2 to the new channels on recording track 3/4. Then we close the routing window. What we've done now is we've set it up so that the room tone track is effectively listening to the recording track, and what we do next will make it behave differently depending on what is playing. So just before we set up ReaGate on these two tracks, here's some terminology you might find useful for understanding the settings. So I'm just going to open up ReaGate. I'm going to drag an instance to this track. I'll close it again. I'm going to drag an instance to the other track. And let's keep this up. So, threshold, that's the one, that's the vertical one to the left, is the volume level at which the gate opens or closes. So if the audio is above the point that we set this, the gate will allow sound through, and if it's below, the gate will reduce or mute the sound. Attack, up here, is the speed at which the gate reacts when the input signal crosses the threshold. A faster attack means the gate opens almost instantly, while a slower attack allows for a smoother transition. Release, which is here, means how gradually the gate closes after the signal falls below the threshold, and a longer release time prevents abrupt cutoffs, which makes the gating effect more natural. Hold is the minimum amount of time the gate remains open after the signal drops below the threshold, and this prevents the gate from closing too quickly between brief pauses in speech. Pre-open means the gate anticipates incoming sound and opens slightly before the signal actually reaches the threshold, and that's really important in spoken word because it helps avoid cutting off the start of words or transient sounds. Hysteresis, here, is the difference between the level at which the gate opens and the level at which it closes. So it prevents the gate from rapidly opening and closing when the signal hovers near the threshold. And dry is the amount that passes through after the gate has had its effect. And finally, invert gate, duck, here, means that instead of muting the signal when it falls below the threshold, the gate lowers the volume when the signal is above the threshold instead. So just make sure we've got the ReaGate instance on the recording track open. You can either record yourself again with your correct levels set, or just refer back to near the end of your section of recording when you had your levels right. So we need to find a point at which there's a breath. So let's have a play. Whatever you're listening with, so you don't deafen yourself. There's a breath right here. So right click and drag. Over here, going to turn toggle repeat on. I'm going to hit play. This is very annoying, but you can hear my breath going again and again and again and again and again. We need to set the threshold higher than the volume of the breath, but lower than when you're talking at the quietest point, which is bit of a difficult thing to find. So if I set this just here, you can check it's working, because with dry temporarily set to -infinity, if you set it high enough, the sound of the breath will vanish. If you put it to a bit lower, comes back, a bit higher, there it is. Now, just out of prudence, I'm going to set this to -36, and I've generally found that it does end up somewhere between -36 and -46, depending on the microphone. So, we're going to set this up, -36, having just checked it. Hit stop, because I do not want my breath to start going. Again, if I change in the settings, set pre-open to 100 milliseconds. Set attack to 2 milliseconds. Set release to 35 milliseconds. Set hold to 4 milliseconds. And set hysteresis to -16. You probably find most people set hysteresis to a much smaller number than that, maybe -4, -6. I've done a lot of experimentation with ReaGate, and these are the settings that have just consistently worked for me without having to require any further tweaking later on in the process. Finally, we do not want to completely cut out sound. We want to reduce the sound of breaths, but we don't want to cut them out entirely. That sounds very artificial. So change dry over here to -30. So up here, here's the plus. Click Save Preset and save it as a default or a preset name that you want to use. So I'm going to call this just narration. In fact, no, I'm going to name it after the microphone I'm using today. So that's a TLM 102 narration. I'm going to call it that. And click the plus again. And click Save Preset as Default. Click OK. Now, when you open ReaGate in the future, it will default to these settings. Next, close that window. Open the instance of ReaGate on the room tone track. Here we are. Because we added it before we set those defaults, it hasn't reset to the defaults. We can actually save a little bit of time by changing down here and reselecting the defaults, because most of them are now correct for what we're going to want. However, a couple of changes. Firstly, set threshold to -60. So that's the point at which, if the audio is quieter than 60 decibels, the room tone will start playing. Pre-open remains at 100, attack at 2, release at 35, hold at 4. Hysteresis this time goes to -4. I have found this to work much more effectively this way around. And finally, dry, you can double click to set anything back to default in Reaper. So double click on dry and it will set it up to 0. And most importantly of all, you need to click the invert gate duck button. So now every time the volume drops below 60 decibels on the recording track, room tone will play. Most of the settings are the same, so that the two gates effectively crossfade with each other, but hysteresis is much lower because there is not that level of variability when we're dealing with those lower levels. Actually, if we go a little further to the right where we haven't got any audio, if we play here, you actually see the volume of your room tone track. Actually, it does really need to be below 60. So what I'm going to do here is, if you go back into ReaGate, you need to get your room tone below 60 decibels for ACX and most for audible in general. So what I find here is you can do is, if you're coming up above 60, click at the top here to see where your peaks are. If it's coming up above 60, you can drag down the wet and the dry here until your peaks are lower than 60 on your room tone. We're going to just save this preset as room tone gate. Don't save it as default because that will override what we've just set. Right, you can now delete the recording you used for setting your levels earlier. Make sure your room tone is dragged all the way to the left. It should be, we did that earlier. And put your edit cursor back at 0. And save the template. Again, project template, save project as template. Click narration, click save, overwrite it. So remember, if you change microphone in the future, you'll need to redo all of this so that you have an accurate room tone track. Beyond that, however, you should be able to avoid touching the room tone track again, unless you need to increase or decrease the volume of the room tone itself, which, as I showed you, can be done with the wet and dry sliders in the room tone instance of ReaGate. One last thing to note is that inevitably, sometimes something is going to be gated that shouldn't be, or isn't going to be gated when it should be. We will cover what to do in those situations in a much later video. See you next time.